It was December 1776, and Thomas Paine was with George Washington's troops. And it wasn't a really good time. They'd been defeated in Boston, defeated in New York, and they were fleeing. And Thomas Paine was sent back, or decided to go back to Philadelphia to produce something. He produced a pamphlet called Crises, and it was to encourage and get people going. But at the beginning of it, he said, "These are the times that try men's souls." I think we once again live in time like that. I think there is a general unease, there's a discontent across the country, and it's spontaneously popping up. Some in the media, in the liberal media, try to say it's all organized by Fox News or it's organized by the Republican Party. I've been to a lot of these events, and I know some of y'all have been to these events, these Tea Party events. They are spontaneous, and there is a spontaneous unease and discontent out there about what's going on. And it's not primarily taxes. We all hate high taxes, and we think taxes are too high. But I think most people at these tea parties are worried about the debt. And I tell people that I think we're drowning as a country. We're drowning in a sea of debt. The deficit next year will be 13% of gross national product. Federal spending is at 28% of gross national product. These are historic highs. The deficit will be $1.75 trillion in 1 year. I can't even conceive of really what $1 billion is, much less $1 trillion. There's a little story they talk about $1 billion to try to give people an idea of what $1 billion is. 1 billion seconds ago was 1959. 1 billion minutes ago, Jesus was alive. 1 billion hours ago, we were in the Stone Age. But $1 billion ago, at the rate the federal government spends, it was 7 minutes ago. There's a quote from Glenn Beck's recent book, and he says that we spend money at $53,000 a second. The interest on the debt, I think, is $26 billion a month. You know, it is out of control. It's a debt, I think, that is no longer manageable. One of the things my dad has talked about for years and years is the Federal Reserve, and I think one of the scariest statistics is that the monetary base doubled in 1 year. There's a curve. Art Laffer had this in the Wall Street Journal. It's from the Federal Reserve, and look, it's at the monetary base, and it's all on the baseline, and then it just shoots through the roof in 1 year's period of time. As that money leaks into the system, there is the potential for enormous inflation. And I think we could have worse than 1979 or 1979 on steroids, when we had interest rates of 20% and inflation of 20%. And I think my dad has asked, I think, one of the most important questions. He's had a lot of good exchanges with Bernanke and Greenspan over the year. But one of the most important, I think, was in the last month or two when Bernanke came before him and he said, what are your plans? What are you going to do if you have significant inflation but zero growth? They usually think they're going to get inflation and growth, and then that they've already talked about this, their exit strategy. They'll pull that money out of the system and we won't get inflation. They'll tame inflation by retracting that money out of the system. But what do if you have significant inflation and no growth? They're petrified of pulling money out of the system when there's zero growth because they think it'll tip us into a depression. So what do they do if it's 10%? But what do they do if it's 20% inflation or 25% inflation but zero growth? And there are examples of that. In Japan, we had 10 to 15-year period of inflation and no growth. Japan had 10 stimulus packages. We've had one. The other issues I talk a little bit about, other than the debt, and I think the debt is the primary reason I run for office and the primary thing we have to do something about, is that I think we need rules. I say politicians can't be trusted. There are exceptions. But I say they almost all, as a rule, have shown they can't be trusted. So I think we have to have rules. And some people think this isn't that, exciting of an idea, but the balanced budget amendment is the only way we would ever get a balanced budget. Now, or a balanced budget rule. The problem is Congress will pass rules and 3 months later they evade their own rules on balancing the budget. But I think you have to have some rules. And an example of where the rules work is 30 states have balanced budgets. By law, they have to balance it. I think Texas has to balance your budget at the end of the year. Contrast Texas or Kentucky that has to balance your budget with California. And actually, California has a rule, but they're an example of where the rule doesn't work. They've evaded their rule, but they're tens of billions of dollars in debt, and probably in Texas and Kentucky and across the U.S., you're going to be paying taxes ultimately to bail out California's government. So rules work, but I think you need rules. We ultimately had rules for our government that were the Constitution. We don't obey the Constitution anymore, but we need the Constitution, plus we need some more rules on the budget as far as having them balance the budget. One of the other things I've begun talking about is that I think when you get beyond a primary and you get beyond our movement, you have to attract new people to our movement. I think one of the biggest things that attracts people is reform, the idea that things have gotten out of control. One of the things that I think inflames people the most is that they have 1,100-page bills that nobody reads. That they're passed, the bill is finished printing at midnight and they're passed by noon the next day. No one could have physically read the bill, and I think that really annoys people. It inflames people. It upsets people. And so I've told people that I will support legislation. There is legislation up there that forces you to sign a statement saying you've read the bill before you vote on the bill. Another reform issue that I think will go well in a general election that I've talked some about is that I think that money is corrupting politics. And everybody agrees to this. And it's the special interest money, the people who want a contract. They want something from government. And it's buckets and buckets of cash. The average incumbent senator has $8 million in the bank going into the race, to begin the race. No one can beat an incumbent senator because of that. In fact, that's the main reason Senator Budding got out, because he didn't have the $8 million in the bank that most of them have. But having that much money in the bank and agreeing that it's corrupting the system, the great irony is that the media says that money's corrupting the system. They talk about it and they say it's a problem. But then what is the primary thing that drives the news cycle in political elections? How much money have you raised? So if you get behind, and that's one of the good things about the money bomb and my dad's movement and all of you guys helping me, is that we're at parity. We may be a little behind our opponent, but we're almost at parity, and they can no longer dismiss us that we can't run because of help from people like you. But my proposal is that since money is corrupting politics, it's driving the news cycle, and it's not getting better. It was a mistake to do McCain-Feingold. It was clearly unconstitutional. It made it illegal for my tax group to say anything about my congressman within 60 days of the election. How can that resemble free speech? It is actually a criminal offense for me to put an ad on TV saying that my congressman voted to raise taxes or voted for gun control within 60 days of the election because of McCain-Feingold. Should have been enough to disqualify McCain from consideration, that alone. But what I propose is there another way that we could get money out of the system, get the special interest money out of the system where they aren't corrupting it? And what I say is, when you get a federal contract of more than $1 million, simply make it a clause in the contract saying you agree not to lobby Congress during the terms of the contract, and that you agree not to give PAC contributions to candidates during the terms of the contract. Because you don't have a constitutional right to a federal contract. We do have to hire people, and it will happen, but let's don't hire people that then manipulate government to get more. Let's don't give Halliburton a $1 billion no-bid contract, and they immediately go back and ask, they pay $1 million lobbyist to go ask for more money. I mean, it's just a vicious circle and cycle, and we need to get away from that. But I think these are issues that can broaden our movement and bring in independents who are cynical Republicans. I think also being forthright about the deficit. I think people in the middle who are not Republican or Democrat, they aren't without issues. They just think Republicans are for lowering taxes for the rich, but they aren't for doing anything about the deficit. That's what's happened to 20 years of Republicans saying we were for balanced budgets and never doing it. But I think there is great potential. We have good news coming out of Kentucky, not only the money bomb, we're now over $700,000.